I think if you look at the last 3 years, one word that I believe aptly encapsulates what we've been going through in the global economy would be the word crisis. In fact, the annual report of the IMF for 2022 was titled Crisis Upon Crisis. And when you look at it, we've had a ravaging pandemic. We're having a war in the heart of Europe. We've had unprecedented hunger in larger swaths of the world. We're seeing inflation reach historic levels, and we're seeing debt rise to levels that we've not seen before. If you look at COVID with 769 million infections and 6.9 million deaths across the world, something that started as a public health crisis quickly metamorphosed into an economic one. In Nigeria, we've had over 260,000 infections and 3,155 deaths. So we've also borne the brunt of that COVID. But what policymakers have done in a bid to save lives and livelihoods has been to go into expansionary fiscal policy, dig into their pockets, and make sure that the worst effects of the disruptions, the dissolutions, and the deaths was kept from happening. The G20 alone, which is the top 20 economies in the world, spent $14 trillion just to make sure that COVID was not as ravaging as it should have been. While this expenditure obviously is not a bad thing, it has taken public debt to historic levels. As we speak, public debt is now at $92 trillion, which is over 40% of total public debt in the world. And just to put it in historical perspective, that is the highest level of public debt we now have in the last 60 years. In Nigeria, we have also seen our public debt growing gradually from 37.3% last year. It is projected to end this year at 38.2%. All of this means, though, that we are seeing inflation too at historic levels. We know that the war between Russia and Ukraine, as we know, Russia and Ukraine are very important commodity exporters. Both of them account for 50% of oilseeds exports in the world and 30% of sunflower exports. So when such a region is in war, then you know what will happen to food prices around the world. We know too that there's been a shift in demand from goods to services, and as you know, services are usually more expensive. There's also the disruption going on in China today with their zero COVID policy, power cuts, as we know, and then their switch from coal to more renewable energy has also meant that power is not as available as it used to be. We see too in China today some correction in the property market. A lot of Chinese don't have quite the kind of investment vehicles that, say, the average American has, and a lot of them has put their savings into property, but that has meant oversupply of property in China. Today, there are 65 million empty apartments in China. That's enough to take the entire population of France. So that correction is also leading to supply chain disruptions. All of this exacerbating, the high food prices. So you go around the world. In Lebanon, you have inflation today there at 269%. It's shocking, but it's true. You have in Argentina, inflation there is right now at 115%. In Turkey, it's 38%. Now, when you come down to Africa, neighboring Ghana, at the last count, inflation there is at 42.5%. We have it at 31% in Ethiopia and 36% in Egypt. So in your dear country, we are 22.8%. When you hear these figures, it tells you that we're not doing as badly. But all of this has also affected economic growth itself. Today, the IMF has revised growth downwards from 3.5% to 3% this year and 3% next year. For sub-Saharan Africa, they expect growth to moderate from 4.1% last year to 3.5% this year, but to take back again to just slightly over 4% next year. In Nigeria, they expect us to do 3.2% this year. If you look at the fact that poverty in Nigeria today is at 31%, 3.2% growth will not cut it for us. And that brings me to why we are here today. If you look at the equation for gross domestic product, exports enter not only as an addiction with a multiplier effect, it enters as an endogenized variable, something that you can control fully by yourself. And so we cannot grow at 3.2% and expect to pull 31% of us living below the poverty line. That is why I'm very excited that Zenith has continued its tradition to call attention to non-oil exports. I saw the chart that Dr. Onyago put on the board, 1.2% non-oil exports to GDP ratio. In the decade between 2001 and 2011, the non-oil exports to GDP ratio for Nigeria was 0.8%. And you can imagine that in the next decade, so from 2012 to 2022, I looked at the board, they are still at 1.2%. But we need to be growing much faster. Countries that are way smaller than us are doing much better. Netherlands has a land size of 34,000 square kilometers. So if you add water, you go to 42,000. It might interest you to know that non-oil exports from Netherlands is 29% of their GDP. Most times they do $108 billion in non-oil exports. Now keep in mind that Netherlands is smaller than Niger State, actually half the size of Niger State. I'll give you another example. Ireland is a country that sits on just about 70,000 square kilometers, and they routinely do non-oil exports of $170 billion. So we can do better. Dr. Beniza has shown us on the board what each region can, facilitate. Each region can pay attention to. We have all it takes. We're lucky too that we have a government whose economic philosophy, I might say, can be encapsulated in market-driven initiatives while also protecting and engendering the egalitarian bedrock of our society. So there cannot be a better time for us to grab this our future, work on non-oil exports, and make sure that we grow beyond the 1.2% that we are currently producing at.